Welcome to the show. Happy Wednesday. You're halfway through the week already. Good for you. That's pretty exciting. This is Sandy and Shawn on Mile High Sports. That's Sandy Clough. I'm Sean Drotar. Danny Bailey, our producer, director, the man of many hats. You don't get to see him, but he's the only reason that you get to see us. Sandy, we are still a ways away from NFL training camp starting, but of course it comes around faster than you might think. And as people start to look at these teams now, you start projecting who may be able to start. And not surprisingly, the folks at ESPN, their NFL Nation crew, has been putting those together. And when they look at the projected starters, by the way, as if they were listening to this program, Bo Nix projected as the Denver Broncos starting quarterback. As we've talked about before, there is no quarterback competition. It's Bo Nix's job.
It's not even one of the slash jobs.
No, not even slash. It's just Bo Nix starting quarterback. And the folks at ESPN decided to take a look at the projected starters for NFL teams. The Denver Broncos, yesterday we talked about where they had ranked with the folks at The Athletic and had them at 30. And today you go to ESPN where they look at the starting projected rosters. And you and I have looked at those and believe it's probably right. I think there's a possibility maybe one or two might bubble up, but I look at it today and think, yeah, that's probably who's going to start across the board. And that would be, we'll run them down for you real quick. A quarterback, Bo Nix, Javonte Williams at halfback, Cortland Sutton, Marvin Mims, Tim Patrick, your starting wide receiver, although I would argue that Josh Reynolds will bounce out one of either Mims or Patrick or potentially Sutton if they make a trade. I would put Josh Reynolds in there. Adam Troutman at tight end, Greg Dulcich as a backup tight end. I suspect that'll actually be Lucas Kroll, but we'll find out. And the line, as we expect, we know the returners, Bowles, Powers, Miners, and McGlinchey from left to right. They agree with me. Sam Mustipher, the veteran who played for Baltimore, will probably take that role as opposed to the youngsters, Rottenberg and Forsythe.
In their view, is a rather significant downgrade.
Yeah, well, and it should be on the defensive side.
Now, I think they're overrating Cushenberry by a little. But some of the holdovers, I think they're overrating by quite a lot, particularly the two tackles, Bowles and McGlinchey, who aren't nearly as good as they're being portrayed in this ESPN piece that has the Broncos ranked in roster quality 31st out of 32 teams.
The defensive side, Zach Allen, DJ Jones, and John Franklin Myers on the line. That's almost a given. Edge rushers, Jonathan Cooper and Baron Browning as the starters. Inside backers, Alex Singleton and Cody Barton. We've told you the same thing. Barton is basically earmarked for that role, although whether it's going to be a three-down guy, that's not really how the Broncos play. It's really not how any NFL teams play. Cornerbacks, they do the right thing and pick three starters at ESPN. We've told you for years here on this program, wherever you found it, really three cornerbacks start in the NFL. The NFL's base defense is nickel. They have, at the moment, Pat Surtain, Levi Wallace, and Jaquan McMillan, which I would say as of today is probably true, but we'll get to some of the ideas that might change later. And at safeties, the newcomer Brandon Jones replacing Justin Simmons, and Caden Stearns getting first shot at the other safety spot. PJ Locke finished with that spot and could be in that mix as well, though if you were to argue that the Broncos' whole outcome would change either way, probably not. But that's their projected starters. And it's 31st in the league. The only team that ranks as worse is the New York, as you would say, football Giants. Mm-hmm. The New England Patriots, who were at least worse yesterday when we were talking about it, are actually, because of some of their starters, projected to be quite a bit higher. They're up at 27. But it's also worth noting that
without a proven quarterback, no wide receivers of distinction.
And the AFC West, if you're thinking that someone's going to bubble up and beat the Chiefs, assuming that the folks at ESPN are right, and we think this makes sense. The Chargers are at 24th, the Raiders are at 26th, and the Broncos are at 31. It doesn't even matter what the projections
Whatever
are
happened to the days gone by, and I'm making it sound like it was 5 or 10 years ago, but it was only a couple of years ago that people were talking about the AFC West as being, if not the strongest, then maybe the second strongest of the six divisions in the NFL.
Never manifested.
This has never materialized that way.
The Raiders and Derek Carr, with some of the coaching changes that they dealt with, never seemed to get going. Now, Carr, of course, moved on with the Chargers. Seemed like the injury bug always took them down. And then the last couple of years, some of the coaching with Brandon Staley raised some eyebrows. And, of course, with the Broncos, we've gone over that ad infinitum, as Sandy pointed out. How many different quarterback and coach combinations have there been since 2014?
Goes back to 2014 with John Fox as the head coach and Peyton Manning as the quarterback. And every year, going back to 2014, the following season, there's a different coach and or a different quarterback.
Goodness.
They went from Manning and Fox, of course, to Manning and Kubiak. And then Manning, of course, retired. Kubiak came back in 16, but Simeon was the starter. Simeon started in 17, but Vance Joseph was the coach by then.
And that was the closest the Broncos have been to the playoffs ever since.
Case Keenum. 18, you had Case Keenum. And then in 19, you had a new quarterback, Joe Flacco, and a new coach, Vic Fangio. 2020, it was Drew Lock and Fangio. 2021, Teddy Bridgewater and Fangio. 2022, Nathaniel Hackett and Russell Wilson. And last year, of course, Sean Payton and Russell Wilson, which was a marriage made in hell.
Yeah, essentially. And now they'll start again with Bo Nix. But when the folks at ESPN take a look at the strengths, it is fascinating because it wasn't that long ago that you could have looked at the Denver Broncos and said this was by far the weakest part of their team. And as you pointed out, Sandy, maybe it is overrated. But the reality is, when we've gone over the quality of this roster top to bottom, even though ESPN says the offensive line is the strength of the team, and my first knee-jerk reaction is no. You zoom out a little bit and realize, especially given the consistency, last year at least, the durability, knock on whatever wood you can possibly reach right now, it's probably true. But at the same time, this feels to me like all the things we heard from the national media a couple of years ago about how great the Denver Broncos receivers were, and they never were nearly as good as everyone thought they were going to be.
They were paid well, though.
Yeah, I think the offensive line is fine, but I don't put it necessarily even in the top 10 in the league.
No, I don't think there's any question that it's a below average offensive line.
Is it still their biggest strength?
Their argument is that it's the most stable position because it was basically together from opening day through the last week of the season.
Right.
McGlinchey got hurt, right?
For
at the end of the year.
Small amount of time. But the starting five played the most highest percentage of snaps in the NFL last year.
Played almost all the snaps, okay? So that's their argument, that it's the most stable of the returning position groups on the Broncos. And for that reason, it is the quote-unquote strength. And it's one of those, if that's the answer, I don't want to know the question. If the answer is that the offensive line is the strength of the team, I'd hate to think what they regard as the weakness.
Well, I'll tell you what it is.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that. I know we will. But the offensive line last year was not particularly good. Now, was it awful? No. But I think we would all agree that as a pass blocking offensive line versus a run blocking offensive line, the line was inferior in the pass blocking area.
Yeah.
Right? Better as run blockers. But you had the stat yesterday that the Broncos on a yards per carry basis were near the bottom of the league.
They were the bottom
last
of the
year.
league.
So
5.3 yards per carry.
How does that compute? Is it all on the running backs? Because the offensive line blocked great, and the Broncos averaged, 3.5 yards?
Yeah.
Per carry
last year? The idea is maybe that's forgiven because Javonte Williams working his way back from tearing 3 ligaments in his knee.
I understand.
I'm
not saying the running backs are
but you're right. And that's the funny thing about evaluating football teams, right? And especially when you can use whatever metrics you'd like. And at ESPN, they argue that McGlinchey and Bowles finished 2023 with solid to great marks in pass block win rate for the second consecutive
Closer
campaign.
to solid than great. There's a vast difference between solid and great.
But even when you evaluate players one at a time, and I get why you do it, and you look at these things and say, okay, this player had a good win block rate or whatever it is. But football's harder to evaluate there because it doesn't happen in a vacuum. As you pointed out, okay, well, great that they were supposedly a good run blocking team, but the yards per carry were abysmal, and this team couldn't run into the end zone from the 1 yard line with alarming regularity. So how good is it really? And it's because in football, all of these units have to work together. You are in a position where oftentimes on a football field, the weakest link decides what your ceiling is, not the best. Now on offense, oftentimes the strongest part can define your ceiling, especially if that strongest part is the quarterback who touches the ball every play. But on defense, it's quite the opposite. Wherever the hole is, wherever the weakest link is, well, that's what offenses are going to exploit. And on the defensive side of the ball, ESPN made the argument that safety is its biggest weakness, specifically because they moved on from Justin Simmons. And we say moved on from Justin Simmons, not that he got traded, not that he decided to retire. They just cut him to save money. And now Brandon Jones and Caden Stearns get first crack at it. PJ Locke, I think, will play. But I'm not convinced, even though I don't love it, I'm not convinced that's the worst part of the defense. I still don't exactly know who's going to start opposite Pat Surtain.
Well, I have some ideas on that are a little bit different than the projection on starters made by ESPN today. My idea is that Riley Moss, the second-year corner out of Iowa, who was hurt for much of last year, but demonstrated when he was healthy, I would say an above-average degree of athleticism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll talk more about Moss in a minute.
Coaches seem to like him.
Yeah, Sean Payton has talked about it multiple times.
Who's an offensive guy, and you think maybe he doesn't pay quite as close attention to what's going on defensively, but he has had occasion to rave about the performance/potential of Riley Moss. So I think Riley Moss will be the starting corner opposite Patrick Surtain. I don't know if that's stop the presses stuff. I suspect that it isn't. I think it's pretty wide open there. Levi Wallace certainly is a contender.
And I think as the veteran, you probably
keep hearing
pencil him
Damari
in.
Mathis is. I don't believe that.
I don't believe that either.
But I think it'll come down to either Riley Moss or Levi Wallace. And I think for a team in some stage of rebuilding,
yes,
whether they're at an advanced rebuilding stage or a preliminary rebuilding stage, depends on Bo Nix. You're exactly right. Bo Nix, who started a ton of college games, more than any other college quarterback in the history of college football, first-round pick of the Broncos, he will make that difference, if there is a difference, between a team that's fairly far along in the rebuilding stage and one that's in the very initial stages of rebuilding. But I think going with Moss based on his youth and on the fact that he hasn't proven yet that he can't be the guy. You mentioned Brandon Jones at safety. Brandon Jones has never played a full season as an every down defensive
and that's
back.
the concern they have with safety, especially Justin Simmons, who before missing some games last year had been an absolute Iron Man. We're not talking missing games.
And one of the leading playmakers among safeties in the NFL.
A leading interceptor among players since he's come into the league. Had 2 years in a row where he didn't miss, not a game, a snap. And now, of course, Simmons is looking for a job. The concern is that Caden Stearns has missed most of the last 2 years with injuries. Brandon Jones has never played a full year. And with PJ Locke, you don't quite know what you have. That's the concern about safety. So it is an interesting spot for the Broncos. But again, this is why when you look at this team, there are things that I guess can be a little promising. But on the whole, you have to look at it as it is, not through orange-colored glasses and think what it can be, as it is. And as it is today, I don't think ESPN's wrong by saying it's the second worst starting roster.
A quick note on Moss. He did rank, according to NFL Next Gen stats, 5th on the pre-draft athleticism score among corners. So though he is from Iowa, where they play a lot of zone, he has demonstrated a degree of athleticism that perhaps would be helpful to the Broncos, who don't have the most athletic secondary in the NFL.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about Moss and who the ESPN believes the X factor is. And it's interesting because, of course, both guys we're talking about, neither one of them is a starter right now. We'll get to that in a moment, but I want to remind you that in just a couple weeks, the 4th annual Colorado Whiskey Fest is coming to the Douglas County Fairgrounds on Saturday, July 13th, with food, wine, beer, and spirits vendors from including more than 50 whiskey vendors. That's 50 there, 50 different whiskey vendors. So plenty to sample if you are a whiskey fan. The festival will be from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. Features live music from the Kevin Austin Band and Mojo Filter, who were so good last year and so well liked that they brought them back. Tickets are available online right now. And if you use promo code MHS, you'll save $15. It's the Colorado Whiskey Fest presented by the Whiskey Cartel. And if you're 21 and up, you can get those tickets today at whiskeyfestcolorado.com. And if you're remember, use that promo code MHS, Mile High Sports, right? Easy. Save $15 on your tickets and enjoy the 4th annual Colorado Whiskey Fest. More than 50 different whiskey vendors on site at the Douglas County Fairgrounds on Saturday, July 13th. Again, you go to whiskeyfestcolorado.com, save yourself $15 with the promo code MHS. Going back to the Broncos, Sandy, ESPN looked at its X factor player, and the X factor player has to do with the pass rush. And the pass rush is something we've discussed here in the offseason because there is a lot of promise there. Last year, Jonathan Cooper led the team with 8.5 sacks. Cooper, you may remember, as a seventh rounder out of Ohio State, but had he not had a heart injury, not injury, but an issue pre-draft, probably would have been more of a third or fourth rounder because he was very productive at the Ohio State University, as they like to say. Baron Browning, well, guess where he's from too. The Broncos have moved him around, but as they're probably most athletic linebacker, gifted linebacker, and basically be able to go side by side so quickly, Browning, the Broncos hope with health, will become probably their best linebacker / edge rusher, and certainly is penciled in as a starter. That's not their X factor. Their X factor is the man who was second on the Broncos in sacks last year, only a half sack behind Cooper's 8.5, is Nick Bonito. Now, Bonito, when you take a look at the opportunity he had to play as a rotational guy, when you talk about someone who's in the rotation and yet still lands 8 sacks, that's not insignificant. I talked about it prior in the early days of training camp last year. Came on this program, and when I was out there, singled him out for the burst, the opportunity to be able to get off that line quickly. He has to do a little better job of timing the snap. He got better as the year came along. And he's one of the players that the Broncos genuinely hope will make a leap going forward. Does a player with 8 sacks as a rotational guy, generally, I think you look at it and say, yeah, there's room to grow. But with Bonito, second-round pick for the Broncos out of Oklahoma, do you believe that this is the year that he not only becomes impactful enough to get close to double-digit sacks, does that mean he has to start either unseating Cooper or Browning to do it?
I think we remember more than one example in recent years of edge rushers being touted prior to the season.
Just a few times, yeah.
More than a few times. With the question being, is this going to be a breakout year? And sometimes the answer was, well, we think so-and-so has already broken through, has already shown us enough. We've heard that more than once. What's confusing to me, and maybe it's not a problem at all, Cooper had the best stats of the bunch last year for the Broncos. Benito showed the most potential, but didn't play nearly as often.
What does that mean? Because I'm not going to make
then
a direct
you have
comparison.
Browning, who I think you correctly identify as their best all-around linebacker, off ball or on the edge, because he does have experience playing on the inside and, of course, on the outside. Then you have Jonah Ellis, who was a pretty good pass rusher at Utah, whose father rushed the passer fairly capably in the NFL during his playing days. The ESPN theory is that one of those guys has to break through for double-digit sack numbers in 2024. I'm not sure I see that, and one of the reasons I don't see it is that the Broncos haven't had such an individual. Going back to 2018 when they had 2, Vaughn Miller and Bradley Chubb.
Right.
They have not since had anyone register 10 sacks or more in a single season. And again, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. Every year there's been someone, sometimes a couple, who have been projected to finish the season with 10 or more sacks. It's never happened. So until somebody does it, I'm loath to project. And there was a reason, apparently, for Benito's not playing as high a percentage of the snaps last year. And I have to conclude that he was too often penalized. He was out of position in the running game to the extent that a guy on the edge has to defend the run.
Right.
He wasn't always where he should have been. And then you had injury issues with Browning last year, not mistaken.
Oh, yeah.
And so to me, again, it's one of those areas that is promising but unproven. And the Broncos have a lot of position groups. You could take, apart from Surdan, the entire defensive secondary And I know Jaquan McMillan had a nice year last year playing in the slot and may have proven that he can be a serviceable player at the very least playing out of the slot. But the Broncos are short on proven players, promising players they've got. But when you're ranking teams in order of roster quality,
it's got to be
you
today.
Can't go on promise.
Right.
You've got to go on production and the extent to which players have proven themselves. And the Broncos don't have proven players. They don't have proven playmakers. They have people at best who have proven that they can be serviceable. I would put Alex Singleton in that category. I don't think Alex Singleton is a star, though he is productive. He makes a lot of tackles, but they're tackles that off-ball linebackers are supposed to make. And he makes more than most, but though he does have some tackles for losses, he makes a lot of his tackles 5 or 6 yards down the field, and I'm not sure how helpful that is. And I'm picking on him, but that's just one example,
right,
on this defense. And I see, for example, on the line, basically listed as defensive tackles on the interior of the defensive line, Zach Allen, who was average last year, I would say.
And
fairly,
certainly and when you talk about guys who were signed by the Broncos, who they believed were ready to make a leap,
he was one of them.
He led
and he
the
had been
way.
Coached by Vance Joseph in Arizona.
Yep.
So the two had worked together before.
He didn't make that leap.
And Zach Allen was another one of those guys.
Watt was talking about how he was ready to make the leap. Didn't make it.
Right. But he was on the field for the Miami disaster in week 3, a game in which the Broncos gave up 70 points.
And 700 yards.
DJ Jones, who's been in and out of favor. And now John Franklin Myers, who I think is a solid football citizen, will be a productive player, hopefully durable. But outstanding, difference-making, I'm not sure I see that. The one player on defense who clearly makes a difference is Patrick Surtain, and I don't think Surtain had his best year last year, which may be good news because I look for him to bounce back and have a much better year in 2024, whether the Broncos find a second cornerback or not. I think Surtain in a contract year will do it quite a bit better.
Yeah, you talk about that pass rush. The Pro Football Focus had last year, if you look at everyone, at least took 20% of the snaps. Baron Browning was ranked 31st with the 74.7 ranking there. Jonathan Cooper ranked 43rd, and Nick Bonito ranked 49th. But it is interesting that when they isolate it by just pass rush sets, in other words, you're once obvious that a pass is coming, third and long. Well, the best players, the one, Myles Garrett, Micah Parsons, Aiden Hutchinson, TJ Watt, Nick Bosa, you get it. But some of the Broncos do, there's an interesting tally there. Baron Browning drops from 31 to 34. Nick Bonito goes from 59 all the way to 48, ahead of teammate Jonathan Cooper at 53.
And the pass
that's the
rush
idea. If you're just sending Bonito after the quarterback, there are reasons for optimism.
Yes, but again, 16% was the figure. If I'm not mistaken,
the win rate.
Pass rush win rate. That's average in the NFL.
Yes.
That's an average.
It is.
Figure.
It's average.
10% is poor. And that's where Jonathan Cooper was. And that's why stats can be misleading. Cooper had more sacks because he played so much more than Bonito. Bonito, more than half again the percentage of pressures, pass rush win rate.
Yeah.
Than Cooper had. 16% to 10%. And again, 16% is average. 10% is not very good.
Yeah, you want to know
so again, I don't know how promising someone is when they have a 10% pass rush win rate and you're looking for more. I'm not sure. Not at 10%, you're not going to get a lot more if you get any more at all. And at 16%, okay, that's average. And if he had played more, maybe he would have gotten to 10 sacks.
Yeah.
But there are other parts of the game, even for an edge rusher. That's why the guys you mentioned, particularly Parsons, you can move some of these people around.
Parsons was
they
third.
can play anywhere, inside, outside. inside linebacker, outside linebacker.
True pass
even
rush sets, Sandy.
Safety, monster back.
Micah Parsons was third, behind only Myles Garrett and Josh Allen of Jacksonville. Do you know what his pressure percent, the win rate was? 31.3. That's what elite looks like. Myles Garrett was 34.7, 35%.
He wasn't against the Broncos, though,
like.
And that's why people think Garrett Bowles had a good year, because he had a good day against a less than 100% Myles Garrett.
But if you're going to be a Pro Bowl caliber, one of the top, say, 15, that win rate's got to be at 25%. That's more than half again of Benito's 16. That's right. I mean, this is really it's a tough spot to be in. And I actually do think, again, that Benito could be one of the X Factor guys. But that, with no disrespect to Benito, again, explains how shallow the Broncos roster really is. That this player might end up being a difference maker on the team, that you need a guy that's a rotational pass rusher, despite the fact he was a second-round pick, to make a leap into being a really, really good one for the Broncos to generate any consistent pass rush on the whole. And the funny thing is, if you actually want to look at last year's stats on those true pass set pressures, the top Bronco on it didn't play for the Broncos, 18%, newcomer John Franklin Myers. Yeah. So for the Broncos, a lot of work to do when training camp gets underway. But when we talk about this situation with the roster, it is going to be difficult. You talked a little bit about Riley Moss and the idea that he could be one of those two. The third-round draft pick out of Iowa was known for his athleticism. You pointed it out in the pre-draft ranking in the combine, 5th among all cornerbacks. We know how high cornerbacks go in the draft. Speed was the value there, 4.45, 40-yard dash, and maybe the bigger one, the 10-second split, 1.48 seconds. Quick.
That's a little more meaningful for a defensive back.
Burst. And the ability to be what we talked about. Surtain is not as good as Surtain is. He is a technician. He's not a ball hawk.
Right.
There would be value in having a ball hawk on the other side of Surtain. Moss, at least at Iowa, was that. Although, as you pointed out, mostly in the zone.
Mostly in zone. Doesn't mean he can't play man-to-man, but mostly in zone. And I do like him as a cornerback, better than Michael Ojemudia, another Iowa defensive back who I thought was better suited to be a safety. The Broncos only looked at him here seriously as a corner, and he flunked out. That's the best way to put it.
Yep, absolutely. A lot to look forward to for training camp, but mostly a lot of question marks. We'll continue to break that down as it gets closer. We're going to talk about basketball for a little while because the NBA draft starts tonight, and we'll break that down with our Denver Nuggets expert, Ryan Blackburn, in a moment after this message from our friends at Zaner Hardin Law.
No one ever plans for a car accident or a major injury coming about as a result of a car accident. But if you've been in one and you have been injured, you know you need the best attorneys possible, and you have them at Zaner Hardin Law. Kurt Zaner and Mark Hardin, types of lawyers you want handling your case every time. Two of the most elite personal injury lawyers in Colorado and throughout the country. They've won nearly every award, super lawyers, top 100 national trial lawyers, trial lawyer of the year, so on and so on. They've appeared in the Denver Post, local news channels, and even on Good Morning America. They handle the most important cases. They work without stopping to make our community a safer place to live. With multi-million-dollar verdicts and the respect of every insurance company, we're all fortunate to have Zaner Hardin in our own backyard. If you've been involved in an auto accident, reach out to Zaner Hardin today at yourstorywill-be-told.com. That's yourstorywill-be-told.com.
Well, the Denver Nuggets will be picking in the NBA draft tonight, at least as it stands. Trades galore and picks being thrown all over the place, obviously in the wake of the Bridges trade to New York as the Knicks reassemble the Nova team. I guess all they need is Jay Wright in some spot, and they'll be back at it. But they pick 28th.
Isn't that amazing how they got 4 off that one championship?
And how about this? In the end, with the trade for Kevin Durant, when the Nets traded him away, netted them a grand total now of 9 first-round draft picks. So the question is, what will you do with them?
What's the number with the Nets now through 2031? Is it 16 first-rounders?
Lots of draft picks.
And they have 4 as things stand now for 2025, which the experts who always talk about weak drafts when there are a lot of international players involved, players that folks haven't seen, right? It's always a weak draft, but next year is supposed to be a blockbuster draft. So having 4 first-round draft choices in 2025 is supposedly a big deal, but I love this trade for the Knicks. I think it's an example of what the Nuggets need to do, something the Nuggets managed to do 2 years ago. If you're going to go for it, you got to be all in.
Well, the Denver Nuggets are just happy to have a draft pick. Obviously, they've been the ones sending them out in the last few years. And joining us now to break it down is our expert on the Denver Nuggets, the one and only Ryan Blackburn, host of the Alley Oop podcast, the Pick and Roll podcast, and the Tip of Our Proverbial Spear at Mile High Sports. Ryan, thanks for joining us. For the Nuggets here with pick 28, this is a fascinating draft. Not necessarily on who they will pick, which we'll get to in a moment, but the idea that following the Nuggets exit from the playoffs in the second round, which is, I guess, what NBA champions do now in their title defense, the idea that the Nuggets will run into the ground because the players that they had picked last year either couldn't crack the rotation or their head coach wouldn't let them crack the rotation. But the salary cap means we're going to be doing this again anyway, aren't we?
Oh, there's no doubt, guys. Thanks for having me. Got a little friend this time. It's going to be very interesting to see how this draft pans out.
There in his lap.
He definitely does not want to be here. Can you tell?
Ryan Blofeld.
It's going to be fascinating to see what the Nuggets do. I'm curious to see how they handle it. I think the most likely situation is that you guys are talking about how they don't have that many future picks. Best situation for them is probably just to pick another guy and get them into the pipeline and make sure that they have a player that they can trust down the line. That's Calvin Booth's plan. That's what he's wanted to do. I think there's a reason why these guys are going to be cheaper for the first 4 years of their contracts, especially if you can get guys that can play, it makes sense. The problem was that Denver, I think, so far in these 2 years of this plan for Calvin Booth, they're now 1 for 5 in players that they've drafted that have actually made a tangible impact deep into the playoffs. Christian Brown is the only guy. Peyton Watson, cut from the rotation, rightly or wrongly, in this last year, didn't play the previous season. And then none of Julian Strawther, Jalen Pickett, Hunter Tyson made an impact at all. So, and those guys were 29th, 32nd, 37th, 30th pick for Peyton Watson. Now Denver's got the 28th pick. Are they expecting something different in this draft? Who knows?
Well, there seems to be a consensus of sorts, and I'm sure you've seen the same mock drafts that I've seen, that Deron Holmes, the 6'9" big out of Dayton, would still be around, number one. And I'm not sure that's a given, but I guess the other idea is that the Nuggets have done their homework. They've looked seriously at Deron Holmes and all but guaranteed him that if he's there, they're going to take him. And it would seem to be a sensible pick in as much as Holmes does something, or at least did last year at Dayton, that the Nuggets haven't really had in a backup center. He actually blocks a shot or two from time to time. Averaged 2.1 blocks last year at Dayton.
Pretty solid player. I love Deron Holmes. I think that just everything that I've read, everything that I've heard, I don't really understand why he is seemingly available at the 28th pick in the draft. That's the one thing when I see what this draft looks like and how weak it is at the top, I don't really see a lot of stars. I don't see a lot of awesome talents. But I think a guy like Holmes, 3-year player out of Dayton, versatile offensively and defensively, can do a lot of different things in a lot of different schemes. That's the kind of player that all of these teams should be targeting. Like, you don't know if Zach Edey's going to pan out. You don't know if
Zach Edey's a backup center. He's not a starter. He's not a guy you build a team around. He'll go in the middle of the round, right?
Yeah,
somewhere in the middle of the round. He's not a top 10 pick.
Is that it though? Because that's where it leads. It's interesting to me for the Nuggets. The idea that in a positionless NBA, the big man is being devalued. And the Denver Nuggets, even at times, both Calvin Booth and Michael Malone have called shot blockers a luxury, have basically been fine with smaller guys just kind of coming in and playing a couple minutes, or taking one of their starters in Aaron Gordon and basically serving as backup centers. Is that the fact that maybe the big man's being devalued? And I guess for certain rosters, that's okay. But Nikola Jokic matched his career high in minutes at 34.6 per game. He hasn't been under 33.5 in the last 4 years. This team desperately needs someone to take some of the minutes off of him that isn't another starter.
15 minutes a game.
Piling it on Gordon, who by the end of the year was dealing with heel injuries and others, doesn't seem to be a solution, even though Booth and Malone have both talked down the idea of a big man. Is the idea now with the Nuggets starting to percolate up because of the fact they ended their season in part because they were simply exhausted?
I think that there's no doubt about it. There are reasons why the Nuggets drafted Zeke Naji back in the 2020 draft. It was the same exact conversation. Mm-hmm. We believe that he could be their backup center. We believe that he could be the guy that they trust by the end of his rookie contract. And the Nuggets tried. They tried over the course of the last couple of years to turn him into their backup center. And he was a little bit too small, not necessarily skilled enough offensively to really handle it. There's some rattling going on with his jumper that really made things difficult. So I understand the theory. I understand why you want to get a backup center to be able to rest Nikola Jokic during the season. He's obviously going to play 40-plus minutes in the playoffs, and he should. He's the best player in the world. He's going to. So you need somebody who's good enough that they can handle the responsibility in the regular season, but not good enough that they have to play in the playoffs, and then you're limiting their minutes down to 8 per game.
And you're using a first-round pick for that. Backup. You've got to have a backup you trust, though.
Sure.
Boston played most of its playoff games this year without Porzingis, and they had Al Horford. Now, Al Horford's in his late 30s, and he was getting 37, 38 minutes on some nights. I'm not saying he averaged that, but I thought it was well done by Boston to kind of massage the situation and find a way. But to me, all you're looking for is a big, and maybe a big. How's this for a concept? Who could actually play with Jokic at times? Would be good enough to play with Jokic. And I'm not saying he's going to be instant Aaron Gordon, but in 3 or 4 years, maybe you draft someone this year who, if you can't afford Aaron Gordon in 3 or 4 years, this is your guy.
It's a great idea. It's what they should be going for. Somebody that can both play with and without Nikola Jokic. Because that is a play, like, and Deron Holmes is a great example of that, I think, where he can handle some of those assignments at the center position, but he's skilled enough, a good enough shooter that he should be able to handle some power forward as well.
Three-point shooter, at least the college three-point line. We know it makes 39% from there. At least
the Nuggets have proven with Gordon in the lineup that they don't need an elite three-point shooter next to Jokic for them to flash anyway. Like, they can, like, somebody like a Holmes could be very good. I don't know if there are a bunch of other backup center types that can play with Jokic. One other one, Iso Iguodaro. It's Iguodaro is his last name. I don't remember his first name. Oso Iguodaro. That's the one. Who is a smaller second-round pick type who is compared to Al Horford in a lot of ways. He could be somebody that Denver also targets as well. I think that the center class, it's the Zach Edey's, it's the Khalil Wares, it's the big bodies, it's the Yves Mises, it's the guys that aren't really going to be able to play with Jokic for the most part. Holmes is the one that could bridge the gap. There's maybe one or two others that might be able to. Kyle Filipowski's another guy that you should watch out for, just because Duke player, a little bit on the smaller side, maybe not the best rim protector. Maybe his skill set means that he could play some 4 next to Jokic in some lineups, but he's probably not athletic enough to handle it much.
We're talking with Ryan Blackburn of Mile High Sports. And Ryan, the idea, of course, we saw it last year, is picking experienced college players because the Nuggets are trying to prop their window open right now with guys that, in theory, the experience will help them make the jump to the NBA more efficiently and more effectively. Do you expect the same thing in this draft, whether it's Holmes or anyone else that they select?
Well, so far, we're basically 4 for 5 in terms of players that Calvin Booth has selected in the draft. And those players have been 3-year veteran at least in the NBA. The only guy was Peyton Watson. He was a project player that they decided to take, and it worked out. It was a great idea. Denver could technically take another project. I'm not sure that that's what they want to do. Jokic has 4 more years on his Supermax extension, and who knows what happens beyond that. I think you probably have to work within the concept of, hey, you've got 4 more years of Jokic. How are you going to maximize them? How are you going to do what you need to do in order to build the best possible roster around him, which means getting some older players that can help you out pretty soon. The problem is that those guys just have such low ceilings most of the time that you're probably not going to get a game changer if you go that direction. And that's, I think, what we've seen with Calvin Booth last year, picking Julian Strawther, Jalen Pickett, Hunter Tyson. I don't really see any of those guys as game changers that could really break into the starting lineup. Strawther, maybe. But that's the point, is Denver is going down this path, especially in the late draft area, where you very rarely get hits, and they've got to find a rotation player. I don't care what the cost is. Denver has to find a rotation player. And if that's a young guy that they need to cultivate, fine. If it's an older guy that can play immediately, fine. I don't really care, but I do think that Calvin Booth has shown a propensity to get the older guys like Baylor Shireman of Creighton, who's a big wing. And Holmes, I think, would qualify in that as well. He's only a 3-year veteran, but I think he would qualify.
What's going to happen with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, in your opinion?
Oh, it's a good question. I think it's a 50-50 at this point between whether he stays and goes. I think that the Nuggets are a little bit hesitant to give him unlimited money.
Yeah.
And
I do too. And I mean, I know they can do it, maybe over 4 years, which would essentially amount to 5, but this is 10 points per game. The guy's 31, making conceivably over 100 million in the next 5 years from someone. Could be the Nuggets, could be somebody else. I just don't know. And I know the coach and the general manager disagree on where Christian Brown is right now. Whether you got the general manager, Calvin Booth, saying, oh, he could step in and start, that would be in line with the trajectory he's on right now. And Malone saying not so fast. He's got to be a much better shooter to be a starter.
Yeah, it is a very difficult decision that the Nuggets are being faced with. I think the circle of life in the NBA would say that Denver has the 2 options. They could either commit themselves to this group and limit their flexibility going forward by retaining KCP, trying for the next couple of years, and then figure it out beyond that. Or they could take a chance and say, we would like to commit to Christian Brown or somebody else. Maybe they find a way to trade for somebody else, which they cannot do unless KCP walks, and do what they can to replace him in a bit more of an organic way. Here's the thing about the way that Denver's kind of handled their business. They've drafted Christian Brown, Peyton Watson, and Julian Strawther. All 3 of those guys should technically be able to be a 5th starter in Denver's system at some point in their careers. This is what they were drafted for. This is the reason why you selected wings. It was to eventually replace your veterans that you could not afford. This is why you did it. If you're not willing to do it, it is an admission that those guys are not good enough to handle it, in my opinion. And if that is the case, if you are so stuck on the opinion that you need KCP's 10 points per game and solid defense, despite the fact that Christian Brown was the best Anthony Edwards defender by far in the playoffs.
By far, not even close.
Then I don't know what to tell you, man. Like, I don't know what to tell you. And I think that this is a really tough place where Denver is. And I think Rich Paul and Clutch are going to hold Denver over a barrel, trying to get as much as they can. And that is also a very dangerous place to be.
Last one for you, Ryan. Let's backtrack a little bit and then look forward on this particular point. Then the idea that you're going to have to go with youth. Let's say that KCP opts out because we know that under any circumstance he can get more money in fewer years by doing so. So let's say he opts out. Christian Brown ends up taking over as starter. Now that your sixth man is gone, presumably I guess Peyton Watson or Strother, whoever rises up. The Nuggets' ability to add a significant name still doesn't really have a clear path. So the fact that Strother, Pickett, Tyson in any combination aren't necessarily ready. When you look at last year, do you place more of that on Booth picking the wrong players or Malone being unwilling to commit to youthful players and seeing what they've got and getting them ready? And whichever way that happens, what would change starting with this process on the draft tonight?
It's a great question, and I think it's nuanced. If you look at the rest of the teams or the rest of the players that were selected in that draft range, you could have gotten a G.G. Jackson at the 45th pick, I guess. You could have gotten Andre Jackson Jr. from UConn at the 36th pick. Maybe Jordan Walsh of Boston, who didn't really play this year. Point being is Tumani Kamara of Phoenix, or not Phoenix. He went to Portland. There weren't that many other guys that I don't really put that much on Calvin Booth specifically of okay, you clearly missed on somebody here, because it was pretty barren in terms of the actual players that they could select. Now, that's a problem for Calvin in sort of a misevaluation of the talent of the players that he did pick when you added 3 rookie contracts, and that could have been a massive issue. That's potentially using up roster spots for Denver where they need guys who could be veterans that could be helping this team right now, even if it's on a veteran minimum. I think that it's more on Calvin than it is on Michael Malone. I think that those players that you add, they have to be justifiably ready to play. And I do not think that they were, just based off of what we saw, based off of how they looked when Jalen Pickett got a brief look in November and December while Jamal Murray was out. I didn't see anything that was super notable. Did you guys? Did I miss something that I think he can be a solid player in the league, but in terms of what he immediately could provide, I didn't really see much that was deserving. So I think that it's more about the players that Calvin Booth decides to put on the roster. I think he should be going veteran hunting. I think he should be going to try to get minimum guys that are looking for a championship, that would like to play, that could be bolstering one of the best starting lineups in the NBA. I think there would be guys that are willing to do that. I am not having those conversations with players and agents, so I am not sure. But I can't understand why a player wouldn't want to play with Nikola Jokic when he has helped made players so much money in their careers,
including potentially Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. He is Ryan Blackburn. Make sure you check out everything he puts together on Mile High Sports, covering the Denver Nuggets, including the terrific Pickaxe and Roll podcast, the LU podcast. Busy man, and no better follow for the Nuggets than Ryan Blackburn. Enjoy the draft tonight, and I'm sure we'll get in touch with you soon, because the 2024-25 Nuggets season in many ways starts tonight with the player that they will add at 28. Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, fellas. Appreciate it.
Obviously, it's going to be a very interesting point. And where could the Nuggets go? We talked a little bit about DaRon Holmes. We'll talk about it more in a moment. But I want to remind you, now that it's it's sunny outside, it's nice. Maybe you're thinking of getting in shape. Well, instead of just looking for somewhere where you can work out, look for the perfect place to exercise, play, socialize, and even work. And we have the spot for you. It's been around since the 1880s, and there's a reason it's still relevant today. Look no further than the Denver Athletic Club, right in the heart of downtown Denver. As a DAC member, you'll enjoy top-notch amenities like a full fitness center, a licensed child care center, spa, massage, Pilates, a golf simulator, and even more than that. But what sets the DAC apart is the vibrant community that kept it going for more than 100 years. The member-owned club is all about you, offering year-round social events, co-working, dining, fun for the entire family. The DAC, Denver Athletic Club, is truly a club for your whole life. And now, for a limited time, new members will pay only no dollars. Zero, no dollars in initiation fees. So you can join the DAC today. Go check out the Denver Athletic Club because now zero initiation fees. You just hop in and enjoy all the DAC has had to offer now for well over a century, a singular membership spot in all of Colorado, in the history of Colorado. It's the Denver Athletic Club. Go check it out now for everything that you want to do with your life. For the Denver Nuggets, Sandy, the idea of picking a big man, to my mind, is an absolute must. End of story. And even if Deron Holmes is not available, I'm looking for one anyway. The Nuggets do have other needs. They need, Ryan Blackburn just talked about Jalen Pickett, who wasn't able to immediately step in and be that backup ball handler point guard. Now, Reggie Jackson has taken his player option, which I think was obvious, but he's not that guy either. He's truthfully more of a scorer in a point guard's body. Ball handling's a need. Better three-point shooting is a need. Quite frankly, better defense is a need. But to my mind, all of it centers around Nikola Jokic, which means you have to get him rest. If Nikola Jokic is running out of gas in the second round of the NBA playoffs, you will never win another NBA championship. If the Nuggets want to keep this window propped up, I think they have to go big.
He played big minutes in 2023.
Mm-hmm.
He, however, was able to rest in the last month of the regular season because the Nuggets had all but clinched first place in the West by then.
Right.
This year was different. The West got stronger, and every team is reacting to that.
Well, he talked about it with the Timberwolves. Jokic said specifically the Timberwolves were built to beat us.
Well, yes, but it isn't just the Timberwolves.
Right.
And you look at teams like Houston and even San Antonio. I'm not saying it'll happen next year, but they aren't far away. They gave the Nuggets a hint of what they could be in the most significant loss that the Nuggets sustained during the regular season by far. And that was the second to last game. It was a loss in San Antonio, a night that the Nuggets led in the third quarter by 23 points against a team that was going to lose 60 games and had no particular motivation to prevent the Nuggets from finishing first, which with a win, they would have done and would have avoided the Minnesota Timberwolves in the second round. Would have avoided them completely, as a matter of fact. Would have been Oklahoma City and Minnesota in the second round. Minnesota,
of course, might have gotten the Mavericks, and we saw
also lost to Phoenix, which took home court advantage away in the series against the Nuggets. In a series that we now know in hindsight, home court meant absolutely nothing in the series because Minnesota won 3 games out of 4 in Denver, and Denver won multiple games in Minnesota during that series. But the West is getting stronger, and the Nuggets have to react to that. And as we mentioned the other day, the problem lies in the fact that you still have people, particularly in this community, who think the Nuggets are still or should still be operating in dynastic terms. In other words, you fell way short this year. You'd better get back on a horse and ride it right on through. And maybe you have to be better than you were even during your championship season.
I think they do.
I'm not sure that's possible. I'm not sure it's possible under the current restrictions that are in place, given their present day situation. The clock is ticking on Jokic. Absolutely. But the clock is also ticking on some other players. Jamal Murray, since his knee injury in 2021, has missed 150 regular season games. Michael Porter played a full 82-game schedule last year. Good for him. But he's on a max deal, and he doesn't play like a max player.
No, that's fair.
I thought 16 points a game and 7 rebounds a game were pretty good this year for him.
I think it was the best year of his career.
A max player.
Right.
That's not a max player. And during the playoffs, was he a max player in the first round against the Lakers? Yeah, he was. Was he in the second round against Minnesota? Not even close.
No.
The last 4 games, he scored in single digits in each one of the 4 games. So it's such a delicate mechanism when you're trying to build and sustain a championship team. And sustaining a team that is in championship contention is a much greater challenge than winning one title. And the Boston Celtics, I think next year, even in a weaker Eastern Conference, I think the Celtics will feel that the Knicks loaded up today. I mean, added another Villanova guy.
Right.
These are all guys who played together before now, these Villanova
But you
guys.
look at the money and the picks they surrendered, this better work, and it needs to work right now.
That's right.
Right now.
But they're good for them, in my opinion. I don't
appreciate it.
care how many draft picks they gave up for 25, 27, 29, 31, especially 29, 31. Who cares?
And fans don't care, especially if you win.
Who cares? You're in it to win it. And I understand the whole Anunoby deal with the Knicks will either make this trade look great or make it look a little questionable. If they bring back Anunoby, it looks like a great deal. If they don't bring him back, boy, you gave up a lot of draft picks, and boy, you had a lot of injuries last year. Who says you'll stay completely healthy next year? But that's where I think the Nuggets have to wonder, how many games is Jamal Murray going to play? And if they're fighting for playoff position in the last month, which they weren't doing 2 years ago, but they had to do this year, that's going to affect you in the playoffs then. If not in the first round, then as early as the second round. That's how good and how deep the Western Conference is. With or without home court advantage, you will be challenged in the second round. Oklahoma City, ask them. Ask Denver. 1 and 2 in the West this year. Neither got through the second round.
Right. The Nuggets, as it stand right now, are over the first apron in the salary cap. If KCP opts in, they're over the second, joining the Celtics, the Timberwolves, and the Suns. And that limits things. And it's why possibly I'm starting to come around with the idea that maybe KCP moving on might not be the best, might be the worst thing for the Nuggets in the short term, and maybe definitely in the long term. But
I agree with you.
The picks have to pan out.
And you have to trust them. I'm sorry. At some point, I'm not saying they're all-stars. I'm not saying any of them will be all-stars, but Jamal Murray's never been an all-star, and he's a 7th overall pick.
Correct.
Back in 2016. He's never been an all-star.
Nope.
And I've read a few things. Well, Mikal Bridges, he's never been an all-star. Well, okay. I think he's a good player, though.
Yeah.
And he fits in with
and I think
at least
Jamal
3
Murray,
other former teammates.
If Jamal Murray had not suffered some of the injuries that he's had over the last couple of years, I think that were the Nuggets wanting to trade Jamal Murray, which they don't, you might have been able to get a somewhat similar package by a team around the league, which is, a raft of first-round picks, which who knows how much that helps you. But yeah, for the Nuggets, this is really a tricky spot, and it is because, again, this is the 6th different NBA champion in 6 years. The NBA, more than any of the other Big Four leagues, is built on dynasties. Now, for the first time,
not anymore.
Now it's built more like the NFL,
not anymore,
where every team has a chance to win the whole thing if they handle it right.
NFL,
and it's tougher to build a dynasty unless you have a singular creature like Patrick Mahomes.
Well, yes, and the NFL is the only major professional sports league that has a dynasty, right?
Right now,
you got a team that's been last 5 years.
Yeah,
they've been in Super Bowl,
been in the AFC Championship.
AFC Championship game.
Patrick Mahomes does
every year.
Not every year. Patrick Mahomes. I don't have it in front of me, but I think Patrick Mahomes has not finished a season as a starter for the Chiefs in which they won
not 3 Super Bowls,
at least in the AFC Championship.
3,
right?
3 and 5
AFC
years.
Championship's the bottom line, and that's again, you have to have a singular player and a perfect pairing of player and coach. The funny thing is the Nuggets have that in Nikola Jokic. But the way the salary cap is built, it makes it very hard to sustain this. And I think even the Celtics will have difficulty with it if some of the teams in the East that had injury issues are a little healthier next year. Who knows how that mixes things up for the Celtics. The league is not built for dynasties anymore. And for Nuggets fans who think...
Especially if you're on the second apron.
Right. Second apron is designed to keep you from getting there.
Now, with Boston on the second apron next year, that's okay because they're fine.
It's okay.
They're fine with what they have. The Nuggets need to add. And the question is, do you have to, at some point, maybe not this summer, but in the not too distant future, have to trade either Jamal Murray or Michael Porter. It isn't Porter or Gordon in 2 or 3 years anymore. That was what we talked about last year. Now it's, in order for the Nuggets to vault into true championship contention again, do you need to trade Murray or Porter?
And keep
one
this
of
in
the
mind.
two. You can't keep both.
Keep this in mind too for the Nuggets, because they are probably going to need to discuss an extension for Jamal Murray to make sure they can keep things manageable with these salary aprons.
Yes.
You might have to give Jamal Murray a new contract, perhaps even before the beginning of this season. That's
Correct.
a factor in what you have to think about going forward too. Calvin Booth has his work cut out for him, but tonight, just trying to get a player that can step in and make a difference immediately for the Denver Nuggets. But you talk about Jamal Murray, and an interesting thought exercise with the Nuggets winning 2 seasons ago, the Celtics winning this season. There's an interesting overlap. We'll go back in time a bit and see how things might have played out differently, because it was really, really close to a very different situation that might have led even to the same results. But first, Sandy, you have a message from our friends at GB Fish and Chips.
GB Fish and Chips, very well known. You've heard their signature ads for years around here, and it's the best locally owned and operated meat pie, fish and chips, drink establishment in the country, certainly in this region. But they also cater, and that's an added advantage. Summer block season well underway. Give your friends and family a unique fry on-site experience. The best part of catering is you don't have to do any work at all. GB Fish and Chips does all the work. Stop by any of their 4 metro locations or visit gbfishandchips.com and bring authentic fish and chips to your next gathering. That's gbfishandchips.com.
Back in the 2016 NBA draft, pretty talented offensive players coming out a year, obviously, and the Denver Nuggets walked away with Jamal Murray at 7. They were delighted to do so because they knew that Murray out of Kentucky might have been picked earlier. It felt like Murray was a steal at number 7, and actually, quite frankly, turned out to be exactly that. But at number 3 that year, the Boston Celtics selected Jaylen Brown, but they gave very serious consideration to drafting Jamal Murray. And oftentimes you look at this and say these teams' destinies would have been completely altered. The fascinating thing is, I think about that, maybe they wouldn't have, Sandy.
I'm not sure they would have, but Dan O'Shaughnessy in the Boston Globe over the weekend contacted Danny Ainge, who's now the lead executive for the Utah Jazz, but was the general manager of the Boston Celtics when Brad Stevens was the head coach during the 16 and 17 drafts, when the Celtics got Jaylen Brown, the 3rd overall pick, and then, of course, Jason Tatum the following year. Some maneuvering was required in both cases, and Jaylen Brown in 2016, playing out of Cal, was not nearly as well known and not thought to be nearly as good a prospect as Jamal Murray.
Yeah,
a
part of
very
that Kentucky
famous
product
part of
where
Kentucky's powerhouse team.
Yeah, teams over and over again. A lot of one and done guys.
A lot of one and done guys. Although that was the period in which things were beginning to slide a bit at Kentucky. Nonetheless, the Boston Celtics had the 3rd overall pick. And according to Danny Ainge, talking to Dan Shaughnessy of the Boston Globe, very serious consideration was given to taking Jamal Murray with that pick. They had their hearts set on Brown. That was the pick they finally made. But if they hadn't picked Brown, they would have taken Murray. Now, both have rings. Brown's been all NBA. Murray is not. If the Nuggets had lost the chance to draft Jamal Murray, if Boston had taken Murray, would Boston have won the one title it's won? And would the Nuggets, with Jaylen Brown, let's say, have won the title they won last year? I think it would have happened for both teams. I actually do. Jaylen Brown and Jamal Murray are different players, but they both matured into leaders. They're different players, and they're slightly different personalities. I think the difference lies in the fact that Murray sometimes needs to gear down, and Jaylen Brown has been challenged to expand and improve his game. And I think during their championship seasons, the last 2 years, Murray did settle down and play with a great deal of poise and, of course, professionalism and at times brilliance on the way to a championship Nugget season in 2023. And I think Jaylen Brown did the same thing this year. I think he's a very different player. I have enormous respect for Jason Tatum, but to me this year, Jaylen Brown was Boston's most valuable player.
I agree with that. And that's why I think when you look back at it, it's kind of interesting to me because I think the Nuggets would have still won. And I'm not sure the Celtics had. And I guess
you're not. Huh?
No. And here's why. And these numbers very, very similar. You know, we have them at the bottom of the screen there. But over the course of their 7-year career, Brown 18.6 points per game, Murray 17.5. Not that different. Murray more of a passer, 4.5 assists. Brown 2.4.
Murray's a better ball.
Brown a better rebounder, 5.3 to Murray's 3.7.
Right.
Brown overall a better shooter, takes more 2-pointers, 48% in his career. Murray 45.2, but Murray the better 3-pointer shooter, 38% to 36.4. In other words, stat wise, not a lot of
not different, not much to
some
choose.
stylistic approach in the way they play. Brown's more of a slasher, Murray's more of a shooter.
They play different positions, but do they really in today's positionless basketball?
I'm not sure
they really do.
Is their team's second best player, their second most talented player. Position. That's the position they play. And I think were the Nuggets to walk away with Jaylen Brown, they probably end up winning last year's championship anyway, in part because the drop-off between Jokic and Murray, with no disrespect to Murray, because it would be probably similar with Jaylen Brown, is a much larger drop-off than it is from Jason Tatum to Jaylen Brown. And Jason Tatum's
and there are nights
player.
When there's no drop off at all.
There aren't, right, exactly. And I can't say too many times, even though playoff Jamal has made his appearances, where Jamal Murray was the better player or the equal player to Nikola Jokic.
No.
And so I think if you add Brown to the Nuggets still win, because very rarely was Jokic so bad that Murray had to drag them across the finish line. But in the Celtics run, there have been plenty of games, even in this playoff run that ends in a championship, where Tatum was subpar enough that Brown had to drag them across the finish line.
True.
So I think the Nuggets with Brown still win. Is Murray enough to drag those Celtics across the finish line when Tatum is under? I don't know.
Would Murray have developed differently playing alongside Tatum?
Would he be asked to do more? Would he ask to be more of a slasher as Brown is? Would he ask to be more of a rebounder? We know that Jamal Murray's an excellent rebounder. Yeah. It's triple doubles in the playoffs.
I think it's also safe to say, we haven't mentioned this, but on the defensive end of the court, I take Brown over Murray.
Certainly. Right.
Every day. Of the week.
And that might be a part of it. And that's why I think the Nuggets probably end up with the same role. The Celtics, maybe not. And at the same time, maybe it doesn't make that much difference at all. And that is an intriguing thing for the Denver Nuggets to think about, I think, during this draft, even though they're not fortunate enough to draft in the lottery, especially not the top 10.
I want to make one point, too, about this idea that this is a weak draft. And I was watching Jay Billis on ESPN last night.
Yeah, what does that even mean,
respect for
really? Weak draft.
He made the point, and I thought, well, that's a smart way to make the point. He said, you could throw Jalen Brunson coming out of Villanova into this draft, and you could throw Tyrese Halliburton out of Iowa State into this draft. All right. Fast forward. Make them draft prospects now instead of established NBA stars.
Sure. As they were coming out of college.
Right. As they were coming out of college. He said people would still say that's a weak draft.
Yeah, probably.
Look where he wasn't even a first-round pick, Jalen Brunson.
Right.
Second-round pick, 33rd pick overall, going to Dallas back in 2018.
You don't know who's going to come out of this.
And look at where we were talking about the Villanova guys playing for the Knicks. DiVincenzo, 17th overall pick, Milwaukee, 2018. Josh Hart, first round, but 30th pick overall to Utah in 17. And Mikal Bridges was the only one of the four was a top 10 pick, and he was 10th, technically drafted by Philadelphia, though he never played for them, of course. He started with Phoenix in 2018. So you don't have, other than Bridges, any one of those Villanova guys or the core of the Knicks right now who were drafted in the first half of the first round.
Right.
And so you have to be careful with these things. Is there a Wembanyama in this
No.
draft. No, there's not.
But the idea, right, so much of it has to do with it's not quite the NFL, where, quite frankly, where you're drafted might even be more important than the kind of player you are, because the pairing has to be so perfect. But depending on the player you have, certain teams have the capability to be more patient, and certain teams do not. And so you look at players that are coming out of France and Australia that we don't know a lot about, that may end up leading the draft, and think that, okay, well, it's a weak draft. Well, how do you know they're not going to be superstars? How do you know they're not going to translate brilliantly? And who knows that I know ESPN looks at a guy like UConn's Stephon Castle that would go,
I think he's great,
4th overall to the Spurs. You don't think the pairing on that roster with Popovich coaching may not turn him into a star at 4, and that doesn't even count down the road. Cody Williams coming out of CU is expected to be picked in the top 10 selections. He's a project, but if he hits the right place, we know about the talent. We've seen it. Nikola Topic, the point guard out of the Adriatic League, unfortunately, now we find out very, very late that he has an ACL tear. Probably still going to be picked in the first round, and maybe even high, because teams look at it and say, we weren't expecting an 18-year-old to come up here and dominate. Because if you're a team that's down, for example, in this case, he was mocked to the Thunder. The Thunder don't even need him on their roster right now. If they love him, they could still pick him and say, heal up, go play a little bit in Europe, and we'll get you later. So, yeah, it depends on who you are. At this time last year, after the draft, we were looking at Julian Strother and going, what a coup. Here's an experienced player who's a known scorer from a quality program, coached by a top coach in Mark Few. He should be able to step right in and contribute for the Denver Nuggets. Never happened. It doesn't mean, though, that it won't happen this fall.
And I'm looking at the CU guys in this draft. You've already mentioned Cody Williams, and I have no idea where he'll go. He could go in the top 10. He could go somewhere between 10 and 15. I don't think he'll go any later than that. Who knows? But obviously someone who, at least before he got hurt the first time last year,
was considered in the mix for number 1.
The top 5 pick, could be number 1 overall. Now, he had some injuries that changed. He was a little tentative when he came back. He needs to get stronger. All of these things are true, but he's 6'7", and he can pass, and he knows how to play.
He does.
I could sense that last year. I saw him in person at least half a dozen times. We watched him closely during the tournament. He didn't play awfully well, but he knows how to play. The guy I like in this draft for immediate impact, whether he goes to the Lakers or Orlando, let's say, with the 18th overall pick, that was the Athletic mock draft that came out today. I think, boy, if he went to Orlando, he could really, and that's a good team. That's a good team right now. That's one of the better 3 or 4 teams in the East, in my opinion, right now, this moment. Tristan da Silva's 6'8". He's 23 years old. He can do everything reasonably well. He's not great at any one thing, but he's a good 3-point shooter. His shot selection is good. He's a good passer. He's a willing rebounder. He plays 3. He plays 4. And he defends quite well. Remember, CU was a good defensive team last year. Just ask Marquette, the team that beat him in the tournament, how good CU turned out to be defensively. And then you have, KJ Simpson, who obviously isn't going to be in the first round, but I think will be drafted by someone in the 50s.
Almost uniformly mocked in the second round, because, again, a guy that you can step in and say, okay, we can have a backup point guard who will handle the ball, make good decisions.
But again, he's a scoring threat. He's not a high turnover guy. His shot selection is good. And boy, is he scrappy. We talk about these Villanova guys and how they all rebound. KJ Simpson was possibly CU's best rebounder last year. Certainly pound for pound and inch for inch, he was CU's best rebounder last year.
Tristan da Silva, to me, is one of the guys that after this draft comes around, and teams look at it, I think he's one of those players that we may be looking at to go, you know what? he's maybe even a better pro player than a college player because of the kind of game that translates. We'll find out. The Nuggets pick 28th overall tonight. That's the expectation. Of course, the NBA draft trades happen all the time and all over the place, so I have to keep that in mind. We'll touch base with the Colorado Rockies, who don't touch base a lot. Yeah, that's pun intended in a moment. But I want to remind you that over the last 4 years, you've probably heard all the ads about online sports betting. You've seen them. You've been overwhelmed by them. You probably even recite some of them in your sleep. So here we go. We're kind of adding one more to the pile, but actually, this is the one you can remember and not worry about the rest, because at Mile High Sports, we've gathered all of the best sign-up offers, bonuses, all the things from all the books, put them all on one page on our website. The idea was to make it easy for folks who are interested in getting into sports betting to find the best options. So we do the research for you, bring them all together in a way that makes it simple for you to know what's available. Bonus bets, second chance bets, deposit matches, all of it all in one place, because not everyone, when they're jumping into that world, wants the same thing. So you can go to Mile High Sports and check out all of the different opportunities to jump into the fun and exciting world of sports betting in the manner in which you want to do it. For example, deposit matches might not be the best fit for certain people. It might be a great fit for some people. Maybe you want to make the big bonus bet. You can sort through all of them easily and efficiently. Here's how to do it. Go to milehighsports.com today, or you can download our mobile app. And a lot of you are doing that as we speak. Obviously, it's an opportunity to watch this program and listen to everything that Mile High Sports does, including Ryan Blackburn's great podcast that we talked about earlier. Then you click on Colorado Sports Betting. It's easy. milehighsports.com or the app. Colorado Sports Betting. We have it all lined up for you. Buy book, buy the deal. Easy. Pick out what works best for you. Join the world of online sports betting the way you want to do it. It's that simple. Think of it as your bonus from your friends at Mile High Sports. Sandy, the Colorado Rockies today lose their second game in a row on the opening of their road trip. This is not a shock, because it's been a while since the Rockies have really looked good. Now they have lost their first two on this 6-game road trip that will be the Astros and then the Chicago White Sox. Now the only team in baseball worse than the Colorado Rockies, but they lose to the Astros 7-1 today after losing last night and after a May in which they were over 500. Now, in everything but May, they are 13-40, winning only 24.5% of their games outside that 1 month where apparently magical things happened.
Otherwise, they're the 62 Mets. They're right on pace to lose 120 games. If you take out May, you can put March in there, 1-3. You can put April in there, 6-19. You can put June in there, now 6-18 in the month of June, including the loss today. You do the math. 1-3 is a winning percentage of .250. 6-19 is a winning percentage of .240. 6-18 is a winning percentage of .250.
Right.
The Mets in 62 went 40-120.
Can do that.
Winning
math.
percentage .250. So they are actually behind.
Worse.
The Mets pace,
245 without May.
except for their 14-13 record in the month of May. Except for that, March, April, June, 13 up and 40 down. And they have now lost 8 of 10, 5 of 6. They've lost 11 straight at Minute Maid Park in Houston, going back to August of 2018. 11 straight. There are many examples of Rocky Road futility down through the years, but that's poison. Up there among the better indicators as to how bad the Rockies are now, standing 1 game short of midseason at 27-53, dead last, and 22.5 games out of first place in the National League West.
With an 11-29 record on the road. The loss today, 7-1 to the Astros. Ryan Feltner deserved probably better than he got, though he wasn't great. 6 innings, 4 earned runs, with 7 hits and only 2 strikeouts. It's one of the Rockies' problems. They don't miss bats.
Let's keep in mind that was a 2-0 game in the late innings. And with nobody on and nobody out, there was a pop fly hit the short center field. And you're thinking, no problem, because converging on the ball, the shortstop, Ezekiel Tovar, the Rockies' best defensive player, and by far their best defensive outfielder, Bren Doyle in center field. Right? No problem. But just as the ball is coming down, you're beginning to see the two dance the fandango under this pop fly.
Never good.
And finally, Tovar reaches out for it, and of course it goes off the webbing of his glove, It's a drop, pop, fly, and that triggers a huge Houston rally that takes a 2-0 game to a point at which it's out of reach, completely out of reach, and they get hammered again. They don't hit. I noticed in their starting lineup today, among the regulars, only Ryan McMahon has an OPS of over 800. Tovar is at 792, which is obviously quite good. But Doyle 707, Rogers 721. Stallings, who is not a regular, is at 835. The regular is Diaz, who's injured right now. But how about this? Jones at 587 was in left today. Cave and right, 624. And Montero, your DH, batted ninth with a 578
When your
OPS.
DH bats ninth, your lineup is bad.
You have a bad
It's just simple as that. McMahon 0 for 4 with 3 strikeouts.
But look at Houston. Houston's got at least 3 guys in their lineup, 4 really today. And I know Salazar, the catcher, hadn't played very much. But Altuve and Alvarez and Leperfido, I think.
Yeah, and today it was
in right field. They're all over 800. They're all well over 800
today for DH for the Astros. He went 3 for 4 with 2 ribbies. So the challenge for the Rockies, look, and we know it happens on the road. I get it. Spencer Arrighetti is not setting the world on fire.
No, he's got an ERA over 6.
Yeah, well, he did.
The game today.
He did. Now it's down to 5.8 after he struck out 10 Rockies in 7 innings. The Rockies struck out 14
He looked
times.
like Bob Gibson today.
14 strikeouts, 1 walk for the Rockies hitters today. The only person who really actually brought the bat was Ezekiel Tovar, who struck out twice, but at least had 2 of the Rockies' 4 hits. Sandy, the Rockies are going to have a abysmal road trip. This is the line. So if you look at the line score, right, with the old school line score, Rockies had 1 run, 4 hits, 3 errors. All I can tell you is that teams lose that game about 99.7% of the time against anybody. That is a disaster. And it's I guess I look at it, and in retrospect now,
they're on a pace to lose 107, 108 games.
107. Right now, they're on a pace for a 55 and 107 season. But when you look at that gap, 245 in March, April, and June, and the winning percentage and being above 500 in May, how do you square that? Is that just blind luck?
May
in May
looks like
opponents? It's an aberration.
It's aberrational. Because you've got, now I know they only played 4 games in March, so you really can't count March.
Well,
but certainly in April and June, you're talking about 6-19 in April and 6-18 right now in June. Obviously, May was aberrational. And they right away at the beginning of June started a losing streak.
Right.
And they aren't right now on a long losing streak, but you've lost 18 out of 24 this month.
Right.
That's a June swoon.
Yeah.
That is most definitely swooning in the month of June.
It's bad. They have won 1 of their last 6 games. They have, only won 2 of their last 10. It's bad.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon. They have that 2-game set with Houston. Now they get 3 more. They get a day off tomorrow as they travel to Chicago to take on the worst team. So enjoy that, everyone on the South Side. You get the 2 worst teams in baseball for a 3-game weekend set. That's fun.
Are they giving tickets away for that?
Just
any passerby will be offered.
Well, ESPN, it's kind of funny. It does look at the secondary market and scans that. You can get in the building if you'd like for $8.
I'm surprised that high.
Not too bad.
I bet if you get close to game time, you can get in there for less than $5.
Yeah, exactly. A smile and a hearty handshake. I don't even know what you're gonna have to do, but I mean that is baseball that nobody wants to watch. And the Rockies obviously are a mess. The disaster homestand, and when they get 3 out of 10 games, you can't have that happen after this 3-game weekend set against the White Sox. And I don't know what to take away from it. They could sweep the White Sox, and it won't mean anything. They could get swept by the White Sox, and I don't think it means anything. The Rockies are bad, and there is nothing stopping them. They have finally caught the Marlins, who had even a worse start than the Rockies had, as the bottom team in the National League. There is no bottom here whatsoever. There's no real hope. Nolan Jones is back, and actually he is playing better. I don't think he's going to finish at 191, which is what he's batting now. But Jones is back. You have Doyle, who, by the way, despite the error, was the Gold Glove Award winner in the National League for center field. You don't really have much in right field, some combination of Cave and Blackman. In the infield, you have Ryan McMahon, he's your starter. You have Tovar, he's your best player. Brendan Rodgers is the best starter at second base. Adail Amador they just wanted to see him. First base, you have, I don't know, I guess you'd maybe give Toley a look, but not today. And so when you have some mismatch there, and Stallings, I guess, even older than Diaz, isn't your long-term answer. And Diaz probably needs to be dealt, and I think probably will be dealt. But Chris Bryant is not coming back as the guy you remember as Chris Bryant. Not now, not ever. That's not happening. So the Rockies and Rockies fans have to move along from the idea that there's somebody coming along for the rescue. The truth of the matter is, at least as the bats are concerned, they're healthy. Be nice to have Diaz back, and the injury isn't meant to be long, but this team is basically healthy. They've got what they've got. There isn't any help coming quickly from the farm. Maybe Jordan Beck, who they gave a look at before he got hurt. Once he's healthy again, I'd try Jordan Beck over Jake Cave, just because why not? I mean, see what you can see there. And I get it, but we haven't even touched on the pitching, which isn't good either. Kyle Freeland is back. I get that, but
he pitched well the other day.
Are not.
Nice return.
The bullpen is already, which it wasn't all that good to begin with, but it's wearing down to the nubs. And you're just in big trouble. This is one of the games, as you pointed out, the Rockies lose 7-1. They were in this game, but the bats were AWOL again. And this team is abysmal on the road, 11 for 29. I mean, you're talking about, again, that percentage of winning basically 1 out of every 4 on the road.
We think Austin Gomber has been a decent pitcher this year, right? Decent.
He's decent. He's 1 in 5.
No, I'm getting to that. Yeah. But all his other surrounding statistics are decent. Won 1 game.
Right. Feltner's won 1 game.
March, April, May, June.
1 game.
1 game.
And he's taken the rock every time. He has 15 starts.
Right. And his surrounding numbers, the walks plus hits per innings pitch.
He's got a 4.63. It's reasonable. The whip of 1.31 is fine. There's nothing wrong with it.
That's average for a major league starter, but he's an average major league starter with this team. Part of that's run support. This team, he's got 1 win.
15 starts. If Austin Gomber was on a middling team in the NL, he's probably 3-3, 3-4, 4-3. But on this team, he's got 1 win. Ryan Feltner and Austin Gomber have 31 starts between them and 2 wins. That's how bad it is. And remember, the Rockies.
There are 15 teams in the National League. Only 6 have winning records, and a number of those teams are barely winning. San Diego 43-41, St. Louis 40-37. So, a couple of those teams.
The Rockies will be.
They have 4 really good teams in the National League and 2 that are hot right now in St. Louis and San Diego. That's it.
Yeah,
that's it. And the Rockies are still 14 games out of the wild card?
Does it even matter? I mean, they're in free fall. They're not going anywhere. Maybe they can beat the worst team in the majors in a couple of days. Who knows if it makes any difference? The NBA draft is tonight. Thanks to Ryan Blackburn for joining us and breaking down the Nuggets options. Obviously, who knows? The trades come fast and furious. Perhaps the Nuggets will be moving into that. But as it stands right now, they will pick 28th tonight. The second round will happen tomorrow. We'll have an opportunity to break that down tomorrow with Vinny Benedetto of the Denver Gazette. We'll get back to the Nuggets and see what they do as the 2 days of the NBA draft starts this evening. It's been a blast getting a chance to talk to you about that. Obviously, we'll have more tomorrow to talk about the Nuggets and see where they go. And remember, the NHL draft just a couple days away this week, too. Another 2-day affair starting on Friday. We'll get into that as well as the week goes along. Thanks to Danny Bailey for making everything work, but mostly thanks to you for watching. If you enjoyed what you had, click subscribe right down there, and we'll get a notification to you every time we're about to come on, and you'll know the topics. You'll have it all in advance so you can check it out at your convenience. We appreciate everyone who watches live on demand. We appreciate each and every one of you. We're looking forward to doing it again tomorrow. For Sandy Clough, I'm Sean Drotar. We'll catch you then. In the meantime, this is Mile High Sports.